Welcome to Transform Your Workplace. I'm your host, Brandon Laws. Today's episode is brought to you by Xenium HR. Small to mid-sized businesses are drowning in the ever-changing demands of HR administration and compliance. It's not right, and you shouldn't have to lose focus on your growth to take care of your people, and that's why Xenium's complete HR plus payroll solution gives you the extra bandwidth and expertise you need to conquer any HR and payroll challenge. Learn more at xeniumhr.com. All right, today's guest is Scott Mautz. Scott is the author of The Mentally Strong Leader. And in this episode, we're talking about the 6 core mental muscles that all leaders must develop if they want to be exceptional. There's a lot of great takeaways in this episode. Hope you enjoy. Make sure to connect with Scott on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn as well. Enjoy today's episode with Scott Mautz. Scott, it's a pleasure to have you on Transform Your Workplace. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Brandon. Let's get to doing some transformation. I'm a transformer. How about that? Not the movie kind, the mental kind.
I love it. I love it. So you wrote a book called The Mentally Strong Leader, Build Habits to Productively Regulate Your Emotions, Thoughts, and Behaviors. You said that being mentally strong is what separates exceptional leaders from people who just might happen to be in leadership positions. Why do you believe that this is such an important leadership skill?
Yeah, I'll start with a definition, and it was in part in the subtitle, Brandon. Mental strength is the ability to regulate your emotions, your thoughts, and your behaviors so that it's a productive outcome. It produces a productive outcome, even in the face of adversity. And as I like to say, it's managing internally so you could lead externally. And I think intuitively, Brandon, most of us understand that we have to be able to regulate emotions, thoughts, and behaviors to succeed. We know that, but here's a news flash for you. It's really hard to do that. It's really hard to do that. But if you can build the habits to increase your mental strength, it's almost like training your brain for achievement. And this is where I get to your point of, well, Scott, why do you think it's so important? I've been doing research on this for a very long time. One piece of research I conducted in mental strength really stuck out to me, Brandon. I asked over 3,000 executives, and, think about this yourself too, as I'm asking this question, to the sky here, right? Thinking of the highest achieving organizations you've ever been a part of that overcame the most obstacles. What were the attributes of the key leaders in that organization at that time? And we found, Brandon, that over 91% of participants described the same profile, even though the respondents at the time didn't know they were describing someone that was mentally strong. And I'll go into the breakdown of that in a little bit. But it helped me to see that becoming mentally stronger is truly how you train your brain for achievement. It's why I call mental strength the leadership superpower of our time.
How does it show up in a leader? Like, you work with several leaders, I'm sure, and maybe we know some publicly, but what are some of those behaviors or attributes that we might observe in a mentally strong leader?
Mental strength is made up of 6 core mental muscles. And in that massive study I conducted, when people were describing the most excellent leaders that achieved in the face of adversity, they were describing leaders flexing 6 core mental muscles, which are fortitude, confidence, boldness, decision-making, goal focus, the ability to stay focused on your goal, and the ability to message in a positive manner, having a positive aura about your communications and a quality to your intent and to your integrity and to your level of engagement, how you message the troops. And we have seen over time that the good thing is that the opposite of mentally strong, Brandon, is not mentally weak. You can become mentally stronger by building on the baseline of strength that you already have. You just have to know which one of those core mental muscles to work out. And that's good news because we don't go to the gym with a plan to work on every single muscle all the time, right? Wednesday might be back day, Thursday might be leg day, Friday is arm day. So you could actually, using the book, The Mentally Strong Leader, build yourself a customized mental strength training program that allows you to build on whatever core muscle that you want to build up that's right for you.
Do you feel like any one of those 6 mental muscles are more important than the other, or are you suggesting mentioning that there needs to be some balance. It's like, yeah, don't skip leg day when we're working out. Otherwise, our body's going to be a little out of whack and imbalance. So I don't know if you've seen more people put emphasis on one of those key mental muscles or not, or if truly needs to be balanced.
The mental muscles to work on, the ones that are the right ones, are the ones that are right for you. And here's more good news, Brandon. In the Mentally Strong Leader, in the book, it has a mental strength self-assessment. 50 questions that you can take that will help you discern your overall mental strength score. And just as important, your score by mental muscle. So how much fortitude do you have? How strong is that mental muscle? How about your confidence level? Really, really, not that confidence level you project, the one you really have. How bold are you? How much risk-taking do you employ in your day-to-day life? How decisive are you? What's the quality of your decisions? How goal-focused are you? How distracted do you get in the day-to-day? What's the quality of your messaging to other people? So through the mental strength self-assessment in the Mentally Strong Leader, you can discern which muscle is right for you. So to your question, the area that's right to work on is what may not come naturally to you. And even if you take this assessment and you score at the top level tier, which is, a tier that we call the beacon, people seek you out for your mental strength. Even if you score at the highest tier possible in mental strength self-assessment, that doesn't mean you could stop working out those muscles, right? If you just stopped going to the gym, you would become flabby. So you have to keep going back to the gym. And in general, it's good to keep a balance across all of them, to your question. But most importantly, it's important you develop your own customized mental strength training program to work on those mental muscles that are right for you, that may not come as naturally to you as an individual.
How is mental strength and what you're describing in the book different or the same as emotional intelligence?
Good question. Emotional intelligence is a slice of this bigger universe called mental strength. So emotional intelligence, of course, is, getting your emotions to work for you rather than against you. And that's clearly a part of mental strength, right? Mental strength is regulating your, first and foremost, emotions. But it's more than that. It's your emotions, your thoughts, and your behaviors. So emotional intelligence is a slice that fits under the big umbrella of mental strength, which also goes beyond managing emotions. You have to have fortitude and resilience and think the right thoughts and control your behaviors and your actions. You have to be decisive and focused. You have to be mindful about the messaging you give to the troops and confident at the same time. So mental strength is broader than just emotional intelligence per se.
So it sounds like with mental strength, it can be learned, especially if we focus on those habits. So we've established that. But it does feel like there are some people that are born that are just naturally like mentally tough. And I think like you in one chapter, you talked about a couple public figures, Kobe Bryant being one of them. I'm a huge basketball fan, so I'm going to, of course, pick on that one. Black Mambo's is like alter ego, where he's just like a killer on the court and just seemed like one of the most mentally strong people that I've ever watched like play the sport, and knew how to lead people. It seems like somebody like that is just born with that killer instinct. But like maybe just push back a little bit on that, if you will.
Well, what I can say is some people do naturally tend to have a little bit more mental strength than other people, Brandon. And, if I asked if Kobe Bryant were alive today and I asked him to take the mental strength self-assessment that's in the Mentally Strong Leader, my suspicion is he would score pretty darn high on some specific muscles, not necessarily other muscles. For example, my guess would be, he was known for his resilience, very, very self-confident, very bold in the way he approached his life, very decisive on the court, all key mental muscles. On the messaging standpoint, some of his teammates sometimes talked about how he didn't always send the most positive message out to teammates. His intensity got misunderstood.
Same with Michael Jordan. He was the same way. The messaging could probably be a little bit better.
Yeah. And so maybe he wasn't so good in that muscle. And so I look, in the public figures, and I look at Colin Powell. I'm not bringing any politics into this whatsoever, but General Colin Powell, I think, of him as an example of mental strength. But, the good news is, Brandon, is whether you think of yourself and you think like, wow, I bet I'm more mentally strong than the average person, or I bet I'm not as mentally strong as the average person. Either way, it is absolutely 100% true that we all have a baseline of mental strength that we can work from. The opposite of mentally strong is not mentally weak. So you have a baseline that you can work from. So wherever you think you stand, there's going to be an opportunity to create your own customized mental strength training program to become mentally stronger and to achieve. It's the key to achievement, like we started out by talking.
So you talked about there's an assessment in your book that will help people identify which mental muscles they need to work on. How does the book then help people determine like what things they could be doing to strengthen those 6 areas?
Yeah, and you can't strengthen much of anything without habits.
Right.
And so the book is built on habits and habit building science. How do you build the habits to actually become and change things about yourself to actually become mentally stronger? And there's over 50 plus habits in the Mentally Strong Leader that go across the variety of mental muscles. And they're all built on habit building science in 3 ways. I'll explain very quickly. First of all, habit building science teaches us if you want to build a habit, you need repetitions. You have to be able to create and do things over and over again in a repetitive pattern. You do that through systems and frameworks that help you do that work and get those reps in, if you will. In the Mentally Strong Leader, the over 50 plus tools are all designed as a system or a framework. Habit building science, point number 1. Point number 2, we know from just a truth, a key inflection point is you can't build a habit, Brandon, if you don't know how to get started. And many habits never form because people don't take the right first small step in generating momentum to move along that path towards changing their behavior. In the Mentally Strong Leader, every tool, the 50 plus tools are in there to build a variety of mental muscles. They all have a section called Your First Small Step. So you know exactly the first step to take, as well as the third point of habit building science is built into the book, which is what do you do in moments of weakness? It's a major inflection point in building a habit. In that, let's pick the confidence muscle, the confidence habit for a second that I talk about and go in depth on in the Mentally Strong Leader. Let's say that generally you're a pretty confident person, but you have a bad meeting at work and you start seeking approval. The negative inner chatter demon starts barking in your head. You start to feel like an imposter. What do you do, even though you're generally a confident person, in those moments of weakness when you're trying to become much more confident? And the book will give you, the Mentally Strong Leader will give you advice in that moment of what to do in that inflection point so you could stay on track to building that habit.
You said in the book that building mental strength is a team sport. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do not just with you as an individual and your inner fortitude and your inner habit. It also has to do with how you reflect and put yourself out into the world, Brandon, and how that world receives the messages you send, takes the personality and the persona and the vibe and the values you live, and then feeds them back to you as well. And if you want to become a mentally stronger team, that's clearly a team sport, because think about what it takes to be truly resilient in life, Brandon, and truly confident and bold. That's not a solo journey.
No, it's just, you need experiences.
Yes, you have to have people that you can lift up while you climb along the way.
You highlight confidence as a core mental muscle, and I totally agree with it. And there's a lot in that confidence muscle. Why is this such an important one, in your opinion? And what are some ways that we can strengthen this particular muscle?
Yeah, I think, boy, when you think about it, in the Mentally Strong Leader, I actually break down 2 continuums. You know, the relationship you have with doubt and the relationship you have with yourself and the things that can go wrong along the way that break down your confidence. And that first one, just think about the words for a second when I say that. You have to manage your relationship with doubt. That presumes, Brandon, that you have self-doubt in your life. And that's 100% true for all of us. In my testing, I found that even the most mentally strong people that were off the charts in terms of confidence, they still had moments of self-doubt. They had just learned how to manage their self-doubt better. They knew how to be, perfectly confident in that they knew self-doubt still existed. They didn't let that self-doubt hold them back. It was there, and they managed their relationship with self-doubt along the way. Similarly, you have to manage your relationship with yourself, which is understanding all the ways confidence can break down along the way. And in the Mentally Strong Leader, I talk about the self-acceptance scale. You can accept yourself fully, but then things can start to degrade. From on one end, you've got self-acceptance. The other end, you've got the imposter syndrome, where you don't feel like you belong. You don't feel like what you've earned is really something that you deserve. Your confidence erodes. And then in between, there's this whole chasm of things that can happen to us. We could start to seek approval. We could begin to chase approval instead of authenticity. We can focus on winning love rather than giving love. Negative inner chatter could start to dive in and erode us slowly. We could begin to think like we're not enough. And in the Mentally Strong Leader, I encourage you to think about the following statement. And I'd like to say this to you right now, Brandon, personally, and to anybody watching and listening out there. You are enough, and you don't have to take on everything by yourself. And when we allow these little wisps of lack of self-acceptance to eke in all those variety of ways and more that I talk about in the Mentally Strong Leader, our confidence has no choice but to exit stage left. But I offer a whole host of tools to combat the things that come up with self-doubt, that combat our relationship with ourselves that erode confidence, to help you in the end become much more confident.
I want to hone in on imposter syndrome a little bit. I know a lot of leaders who are self-proclaimed like they have imposter syndrome.
Yes.
I feel like I have that too. And on one side, there is this like lack of confidence that comes with it. But in the other side, like I feel like it drives me to get better because I'm like what you just said, you are enough. I'm like, I'm not enough. That's what I'm telling myself. And so then it drives me to grow and learn and all these things. How does imposter syndrome play a role in our mental toughness?
Yeah, it really gets in the way. And what I always tell folks for imposter syndrome, it is literally, when you think about that relationship with yourself, on one end is self-acceptance, as I talk about in the Mentally Strong Leader. The other far end, worst case scenario, is imposter syndrome, where you are literally not accepting yourself, what you've accomplished, that you're enough. And in the Mentally Strong Leader, I go into depth about how to stop imposter syndrome to help bolster your sense of confidence. And I'll just share 3 quick tips. I go much more in depth on it. But first, of course, is the obvious part to combat imposter syndrome. You have to own your accomplishments, right? You have to ask yourself, where am I underestimating and underappreciating myself? What should I give myself more credit for? Where am I giving away too much credit in general? What simply would not have happened if it were not for me? Now, the first step is never enough in its own, and I'll get to the other 2 very quickly. But in itself, Brendan, it's never enough, because even when you say, okay, I'm owning my accomplishments, it can still produce this feeling of, yeah, but I don't feel like I earned them. So that's not enough. You got to start there. Own your accomplishments. But then second, you have to be open, as I like to say, to imposter discomfort, but closed to imposter thoughts. In psychology circles, it's known as acceptance. In other words, yes, you might have doubts about whether or not you can really, as an example, lead that team in your new role. You might have doubts. And you got to let that self-doubt park there and exist, and don't fight it. Let it sit there. You just can't let it define you. The question should be, you spend your time deciding how to best lead, not if you can best lead. And when those imposter thoughts pop up, you got to detach yourself from them. You got to almost think of them as a thought bubble separate from your head. Oh, there's those imposter thoughts again. They're not part of me. I see them. They're there. I recognize them. I'm not going to give in to them. You're going to be open to the discomfort of imposter, but not to the thoughts. And then the third part that really can help this is to think of your values and your value, not just your valuation. Meaning, oftentimes imposter discomfort arises because we think of what others value us for, how they would place a value on us. Oh, Brandon, yeah, well, he's not the greatest podcast host in the world because blah, blah. This is in your head. You're imagining that, right? How do they place their value on you? But if you stop back and say, no, what are my values? Not only what's my value, what skills, strengths, and perspective do I know I uniquely bring to the table, my value, but what are my values? To carry out the example, what are you trying to accomplish with your podcast, right? Whatever that is, if you're being true to that, you are not being an imposter. The value you place on yourself, the skills you know you have, and the values, with an S, you have in bringing that podcast to life are critical, especially because, and I've learned this over the years myself, imposter feelings, they're booing you from the cheap seats, Brandon. But your values, they sit right in the front row cheering you on. And you just have to be able to discern between the two of them. And I go into a lot more depth on that in the Mentally Strong Leader.
Boldness is another mental muscle that is just really key. And you said it paves a way to growth. How does this show up in a leader, and why does it contribute to growth?
Yeah. Again, I talk a lot about this. I have a whole chapter on boldness. It's because it's a core mental muscle in the Mentally Strong Leader. One of the core, and I talk about a lot of ways, one of the core ways is this. I'll do this by telling you a real quick story. So have you ever been to a casino, Brandon?
Of course I have.
We all have, right? I'm not talking about in the workday when you should be working.
No, of course not. Weekends only.
Well, I had a casino client once. I did a leadership keynote for them in a workshop, and we were out to dinner, and they told me a very interesting story. They're having a throughput problem with one of the games on their floor in their casino. And by throughput, I mean the ratio of people that were, standing around watching the game being played, clogging up the floor, to the number of people that were actually playing the game and putting their money down and playing the game. The ratio was way out of whack. So it was creating a very inefficient flow through on their casino floor, a throughput problem. Now, do you want to take a guess as to what game might have been presenting that issue where plenty of people were watching, not enough people were playing?
Craps.
You jump right on it. Craps. Why do you think that is?
I think there's excitement. Like people, it's a game you could quickly observe, and it typically, like at least the casinos I've been to, it's usually on the outer side where more people can stand around, but then it clogs up the pathways to flow throughout the casino.
You're on the edges of it. Here's what the casino learned. For those folks that are watching this that have never played craps, quickly, it's in a table that's kind of a sunken table. And then you have a green felt piece that, you roll dice on top of. It's a game of chance with dice, and you place a variety of bets. And if you've seen a craps table, if you haven't, go Google it afterwards. You'll see what I'm talking about. It is really confusing to look at.
Yes.
There are all kinds of numbers on it. And, I like to joke, Brendan, I play craps, with grad school friends sometimes, and I still don't know how to play craps.
Right.
I have to tip the barman or the barwoman to remind me of the rules of betting in craps because it's intimidating. So what they were finding was people literally intimidated by the game wouldn't step up and place their money down. There's a saying that comes from Vegas, step up and roll the dice. You've probably heard of that saying, Brendan, right? Take a risk. And they were finding that people weren't doing that because they were intimidated by the game. They didn't understand the rules of the game. Meanwhile, back at the office, people don't take risks. People aren't bold because they don't understand the rules of risk-taking, Brandon. So some of the best leaders that I see are the most bold. One of the behaviors, one of the ways they flex that mental muscle is by establishing the rules of risk-taking for their organization. They lay out right up front. Here's what a good risk looks like. Here's what a bad risk looks like. This is what happens when you succeed with one, when you fail with one. Here's who needs to approve what level of risk, and so on and so on and so on. If you can spell out the rules of risk-taking, you're sending the right signals that risk-taking is welcome. Just do it according to these rules, and then people will understand the rules. They'll step up and roll the dice. And I've seen over and over again, that's one of the traits of leaders that have a boldness muscle bulging out of their head.
Speaking of risk-taking, decision-making is another mental muscle that I think is so core to being a good leader. And it's interesting because I've heard so many people say, I'm going with my gut. And then I've heard decision science, that decision-making, there's literally a science behind it. And we can get better at making decisions, probably through habits. How do we get better at making decisions, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think, the first thing you have to do is you have to be able to avoid decision-making biases. And I talk about this a lot, in the Mentally Strong Leader. You're probably not surprised, since one of the core mental muscles of mental strength is decision-making, the ability to make good decisions, to make them decisively, not erratically, informed, not slowly, not fast, but decisively in the right speed. But decision-making biases get in the way all the time. And if you think about it, I go through, in the Mentally Strong Leader, the 12 most common decision-making biases. Clearly, I'm not going to cover all of those, but the most common one we all know about is confirmation bias, right? The tendency we all have to look for the information that we want.
It's easy.
to meet the decision that we want to make. I know I want to fire this guy. I'm going to go out and look for the information that tells me that he or she is a bad person, right? It's confirmation bias that gets in the way. And of course, you got to invite people in to challenge your point of view and disprove what you're inclined to decide. Anyways, you have to accept inevitabilities sooner to avoid confirmation bias. And that's just one of the many. There's also the IKEA effect bias, which is known as the sunk cost bias, which is the more work you put into something, the more likely you're going to decide in the favor of that thing you've been putting a lot of work in. That's why it's called the IKEA effect, right? We buy IKEA furniture, we put a lot of work into it, and then we rate that piece of furniture higher when we're done with it because we put so much effort into it. If someone else built it, it wouldn't get as high of a rating from us for quality, consumer satisfaction. It's one of the genius things about the IKEA model. You like the stuff more because you have some stakes in the game. But you have to be able to avoid the sunk cost bias in the real world. So I go through in detail the 12 most common decision-making biases in the Mentally Strong Leader and how to spot them and cut them off so you can make much better decisions.
Mentally strong leaders make goals and they stick to their goals. And in the book, you offer a bunch of tools to help us stick to our goals. One of them being the mental spotlight. What is that? Describe that.
Yeah, think about a spotlight hitting the stage, Brandon, and at the top of that, spotlight, where the beam is at its narrowest. That is where the focus is narrow because you're deciding what you need to focus on. And most of us, we don't have a problem with focusing per se. We have a problem with deciding what to focus on. So you picture that spotlight. And oh, by the way, in a theater, when there's a spotlight, the environment around you is usually dark. So you have to start with that. That dark theater environment represents the fact that you have to stop multitasking. You have to see the world around you as it's dark. Everything else has gone dark. And the thing you need to focus on is that narrow beam of light that's up at the top. Then you mentally picture that spotlight. It gets wider slowly, doesn't it? As it goes down until it finally, trying to do this within the camera here, finally hits the stage. So when you're at the top of the beam of that light in this narrowest part, focusing on what matters to you, as you're mentally riding the beam down, you have to give yourself some permission to bounce within that beam. Just don't go outside of it. Stay focused on your task. And yes, you can have slight little, mental, I'm thinking about this thing now, but you want to stay within that bandwidth and not go outside it. If you catch yourself not focusing on the thing you're supposed to be focusing on, being outside that beam of light, that's okay. Just pull yourself right back into that beam of light until you ride the beam of light all the way down, maintaining the intensity and the sharpness of focus, forgiving yourself for, when you bounce back and forth within the beam, until you get to the point of the stage where it's at its roundest. This is where you're surrounding your work, completely engrossed in a state of flow. And what I've learned over the years is teaching folks this metaphor of a mental spotlight is something that they can grasp onto and hold onto so that when they're really trying to concentrate, they can be like, okay, I'm bouncing outside the mental spotlight. I need to get back in. I need to get to that point where I'm surrounding my work and in a state of flow. Now, I go into much more detail on this in the Mentally Strong Leader, but that's the gist of the concept of the mental spotlight.
Yeah, I like that concept because I think a lot of what separates like great leaders from poor leaders is great leaders know how to prioritize the most important stuff. And I feel like the mental spotlight, that is a key example of like everything in that circle. These are my priorities that are going to reach my goals. Everything outside of that, need to delegate or just let it go.
That's right. And don't forget, turn the lights off in the theater. You never see the spotlight to begin with, right?
Oh, that's a fantastic point. Yeah.
Put that phone in the other room if you have to.
Yeah.
The notifications that beep aren't going to help you any.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. Like the flow state, deep work, like very important for a mentally strong leader. Well, as we wrap this up, like, do you believe that anybody can become mentally strong as a leader, or are certain people predisposed to being stronger than others?
Well, I do believe that, and I'll even one up you on that one, Brandon. I believe you could become mentally stronger, not just at work, but also in life. You think of the title of the book, The Mentally Strong Leader. What I'm really referring to is self-leadership. And it makes sense. Mental strength, it's self-leadership at work and in life. And because it's self-leadership, that means it's up to you to take the reins. And if you start with the mental strength self-assessment to discern how strong are you overall mentally and what core mental muscles do you need to work on, absolutely, you can build your own custom mental strength training program, which gives me even greater faith. And we've seen it in our data and in the testing of the assessment over and over and over again. You absolutely can become mentally stronger because you start from a place that's tailored and customized to what you need to work on, to the weights that you need to hit when you go into that gym. You know what you need to work on and you can do it. And because the opposite of mentally strong is not mentally weak, we all have a baseline that we can build from. I know that every listener out there can get mentally stronger.
Scott, I really enjoyed you coming on the podcast. I appreciate everything that you said today. I agree. Being mentally strong is super important for especially modern day leadership in this day and age. So well done on the book. Any parting thoughts or anything you want to point people to?
Yeah, I would just say, you can find me at scottmautz.com, SCOTTMAUTZ.com. And you can learn about, I'm a keynoter. I do workshops on, of course, you can find the book, The Mentally Strong Leader. I do workshops and keynotes on that as well. And I put together a free gift for your listeners and viewers today, Brandon. If they go to scottmautz.com/mentally strong gift, they'll get a 60-page PDF for free that they can download that contains the mentally strong, the self-assessment, so that you can actually start to figure out early before you even get the book, okay, so where do I stand on mental strength? And then it also has a series of questions and prompts that will help you get the most out of the book, The Mentally Strong Leader. So go to scottmautz.com/mentally strong gift to get that free 60-page PDF.
My guest today has been Scott Mautz, the author of The Mentally Strong Leader. Scott, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me on, Brandon. My pleasure.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning in for today's episode of Transform Your Workplace. The content on this show is strictly for general information and educational purposes only, so that you can go transform your workplace in a positive way. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed on this show are the guest's own and don't represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of either Xenium HR, the sponsor of the show, or me, the host, Brandon Laws. Additionally, Xenium HR or myself, Brandon Laws, doesn't endorse any guest, their business, or any organization they represent, so discretion is advised. We encourage you to work with a trusted advisor to find a custom approach that fits your organization's needs. Thanks for tuning in to today's episode.